My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Mark Kronquist. It's March 10th, 2025. We're at the Troon Tasting Room in McMinnville. And thank you to everybody at Troon for allowing us to use their space today. Thank you, Meg. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. First question, let's get started with why wine?
Well, fourth generation Oregonian. Grew up in Lake Oswego, fourth generation Oswegan. Looking at colleges. The whole be all end all of the story was my mother was an educator. My uncle was a co-op in Lake Oswego. My grandmother ran the newspaper. And quite frankly, you had to date women in other cities in order to have any privacy at all. And one of the women I was dating, and it was Marcy Hamby, whose father was Drannon Hamby. We dated for some time. She was and is a wonderful woman, and she's now one of the alumni and a famous chemist. But, she turned me on to the, if you will, Linfield experience. And, everybody in my family for generations had gone to U of O. And Linfield came through with an aid package, and it was more fun. Oh, it's also closer to Marcy because she was just a year behind me, and she was a senior in high school, but what the heck. And it's like I could see myself thriving in a smaller campus environment than being one of 20 or now 50,000 people in U of O or OSU type state system. And got there, and I was 17 when I first came to campus. Because I started early. My birthday's in July, so I have sucked growing up because my birthday's July 2nd. July 4th is a holiday. You're one of those end of the year summer birthday things. There's nobody around for your birthday parties. It's even worse than having a Christmas birthday. Because at least you get presents on a Christmas birthday. But started because I like to be involved, and this is a Linfield Oak Leaves yearbook. And the prior year, the yearbook was about to die because of $500 in debt. And, I was talking to recruiting because yearbooks really, at the time, were a recruiting tool as well. The admissions would buy them and send them out or pay for them and send them out to high schools. And they'd live there and, there's the catalog, but there's also a deeper view. So I became the savior, whatever. And many more talented people were involved than me. But I went to campus early with the intent of running this as part of a very talented team and saving it as a tool. And, alumni relations loved it. The administration kicked in just token amounts now when you stop to think about it. But the debates over like $500 in debt and $2,500 in production costs were ridiculous at the time. So this was summer of 1979. I'm all of 17 years old, already involved in politics. And I hear that someone named Myron Redford owns a winery just down the road. And so my dad, who's passed away, was a Rosarian, which is Oregon's ambassadors. They're retired or business people who represent Oregon around the world. And he was the wine buyer, and Oregon wine was just percolating up. The 1978 edition of the wine touring thing, which you have, which I've given you if you don't have from me, had just been published. And so the Rosarians were all like, oh, let's go to these little tiny places like Chateau Les Amitiés, which is a double wide. Who was a double wide?
It was a very nice double wide, though.
Yeah, that was our house name for Myron's trailer was Chateau Les Amitiés. And my parents dovetailed, or the wine committee dovetailed with the beginning of the Linfield experience. And so I got to McMinnville and went out to Amity and met Myron. And you guys have both met Myron. If you haven't, you need to, Abby. I was 17 years old. And I don't know if you can see the impression down there at the bottom, but yeah.
There we go.
So I think the statute of limitations has passed on that. I hope so. But I started helping Myron run his parties, run his events. I think the first thing I was involved with was a 4th of July party. And then British cars I like. And then, I helped Myron run harvest parties, 4th of July parties, events,
The famous solstice party.
solstice parties, you know, forever. And you got to know everybody. Susan Sokol-Bleiser was my advisor for a while. She was an advisor. Other professors owned small chunks of wineries. It was like Peter Adams was a professor from PSU, was making a wine. He couldn't afford to, he wanted to use New Oregon oak. He couldn't afford to bottle it. He left it on new oak for 2 or 3 years.
Oh my God.
So you're like drinking barrel staves. And you get involved. And David Lett, Erie, had his 83 South Block. And he would sell it to students at like $10 or $12 a bottle. And, you know, that was the culture. And you'd go on dates, and I would take girlfriends, and, you know, I mean, we'd go to wineries. We'd go to wine tastings, and it was very informal. It was very fun. There were a lot of barns and double wides, and, you know, it wasn't like Alexana or what it is now. It was, you know, I mean, I remember that some tractor broke down, so we had somebody loan us their Ferrari tractor from the woman who owned the vineyards up in Ridgefield, trucked it down. And I was Amity and a couple others over the hill there. I think it was Rich Schmidt and a few others. And it was a bunch of people coming together and working. And then British cars have always been a mental illness of mine. So the Nouveau release is the very first release. And so I took my MG. I got the MG clubs to come down. We sent one up to Catalyst. We sent another British car down to San Francisco, in Portland or whatever. And on Nouveau Day, which is what that poster was, we released a Nouveau. And fast forward, you know, I turned 21. I go to Myron and it's like, hey, Myron, I'm 21. Can I have a glass of wine today? And he said, Kronquist, you asshole. How long you been working for me? I said, 3 years. You asshole. But he took Susan, my girlfriend at the time, for a long time, and I to Nick's for dinner and had a bottle of our birth year wine, which is a 61 Bordeaux. And, you know, it was that sort of camaraderie, that sort of esprit de corps, that sort of, you know, everybody's friend. And there's not a lot of showiness yet. And then there was this thing where, you know, I've had a server's permit forever and ever. And there was this thing where called International Pinot Conference, which was really a couple tents in the rain in the oak grove only. And it's like, Myron, you need to see Mark, you need to pour here. So we're sitting out there with a whopping 100 people or so over the weekend, getting soaked to the skin and pouring. And, you know, these things developed and you moved on. And, you know, one of the things I ran for Myron for years was his harvest parties. And that is my son, Ian, who is now 30 years old. And, you know, forever the kids and I and family and friends would do the harvest. That's for you guys too, for the archive. And I mean, we would get together and it would be a potluck lunch and Nick's would cater dinner. And there was Janice and then there was Vicky, and Vicky made a great lunch production of it. And the Morris dancers would come, and it was a community, a camaraderie. There were a ton of small wine events back then. Salem Wine Festival, St. James over here had the Catholic area school, had a little wine festival. And they were everywhere, and they were not 3 million people in a 1 ounce pour. It was a chance to actually meet and greet and talk to people. And again, that was the camaraderie that started in the early days. So I don't know how many million of those I did. And the archive has got glass collections, and there's a bunch more in the car. Somehow I saved 1 million glasses. You would have no idea these things even existed. They're not a blip on the history books, but, you know, being a fourth generation Oregonian, being a bit of a historian, realizing that you're on the cusp of something interesting, you save that because no one else ever did or would. And, when I graduated college, there were, I believe, and Rich can correct me on this, 34 or 37
That's about right.
bonded wineries in January of 1984.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, and, what are there now, 1,400?
1,200?
1,200? Well, we've had a lot of attrition in the past couple of years. But, and there's been a lot of growth, a lot of experience. A lot of people have done wonderful things. I shot everything for Women for Wine Sands, all the wine events. About 10 years ago, I did a book for Winderly. There's a couple versions of this. This is the one they gave out to Wine Club. There was also did Viewmaster Reels. It was basically a year in the life of one of Oregon's premier wine estates. So you're out there going through the year from, nothing, mud to whatever to, you've got bud break and whatever. But it takes them through, and they printed up thousands and thousands of these and gave them away, and other people have done similar things, and I've shot all the photos for them or whatever. But, their one thing was no Photoshop, which was fine. They wanted it to be 100% true, and it was. I'm fairly talented, so I'm able to do stuff like that without Photoshop. But it's just, how do you get the picture across? And then, we've evolved, and now we're at Troon. It's a lovely tasting room. It's one of a million of them downtown McMinnville on 3rd Street, which is insane. But good for them. It's an industry that's moved up and moved ahead. And it's an honor to be a part of it. It's an honor to be a continuing part of it. Right now in the Subaru, I have a load of stuff from Shalon in Astoria. Paul was another iconic Oregon winemaker. You guys have interviewed him. I suggest you look it up because he was a kick. And he passed away at the age of 99 after a very full life. He describes himself as the world's oldest hippie, and he was. Sadly, I didn't salvage it. I tried to salvage everything I could. There was a carboy full of Salal berry wine that I believe was laced with probably LSD. And I'm told it got discarded in the transition, but it's like, what the hell were these people thinking? But, he made a lemon meringue pie wine. He made a mango wine. He made a delicious peach wine, a wonderful blackberry wine. And, Myron would always have us all over on Thanksgiving and winemakers and people flying in, and there'd be a Stump the Chump party. And I would go to Tanzania and bring back a bottle of black currant wine and take the label off and it tastes like a California cab. It's, because these people have been drinking since noon. They're all winemakers and sommeliers, and, but it's like they continually misidentified aged Himalayan blackberry wines as cabs as well. And then I got a bad reputation for stumping the chump, but I had to live up to it. Most people was like, oh yeah, I picked up something weird in Australia. There's down by Stonehenge, the next henge up is a Pinot Noir producer who gets 20 cases a year in a climate that is not suited even now for Pinot. And it's just a labor of love. But I bought several bottles and got them back here, and that was another Stump the Chump. It's like, what is it? It's the United Kingdom Pinot Noir. And I remember the henge, but it's the next henge up from Stonehenge. It's the biggest one. And that there are people around the world, and that dovetailing back to IPNC, and you guys can edit this however you want. It was fun watching it grow. It's been no fun watching it die. I volunteered there for endless number of years. And the last IPNC, I believe, had 428 total tickets sold. And I know that Linfield is a huge stakeholder on it. I was talking to Aaron, who just bought Red Hawk, and a couple other people about how do we bring it back? And at a couple of the meetings there, nobody's talked to Myron. Nobody has talked to the Ponzis. Nobody's talked to Sokol Blosser. Bill and Susan are still around. Dick and Nancy are still around. Fred and Jenny are still around. Myron's still around. Of the book, The Boys Up North, and again, dovetailing back, which I think you have multiple copies of that, is, how do we tie back to our roots? How do we talk to Paul O'Brien down at Umpqua? My cousin Betsy and her husband used to come out, and it's really no fun just getting on an old person bus, going from winery to winery, drinking with old people in the Pacific Northwest. Why don't we hike or bike or go to the coast or go see Rob Bell at Cathedral Ridge up the gorge, or pop over, God forbid, into Washington where they grow the Nebbiolo and all the Italian grapes right by Maryhill. And how do we take IPNC, keep it the core, but branch it out? And I would love to be involved in that. I've reached out a number of times. I don't know what's going on there. I know that they're deeply in debt and no one's getting back to me, so whatever. But I'm here if we can help save it. And there are a lot of people who want to, because it did put Oregon on the map. And it's one of those things that should continue in a modified way. So yes, going back to Shalon, Paul, Susan and I went to see him right after he first opened. Again, we weren't 21. No one cared. And, here's this man with a dream, and it's 6 days old. And it's a rainy, crappy December day, and we're staying at the family cabin down in Cannon Beach. And, he's got a compelling story, a brilliant man. And so we bought a couple of his wines and got to know him over the years. And over the decades, he lost his sense of taste. You lose your taste buds as you age. And it's I went down there and it's Paul, what the hell is this? It's Mark. It's seriously, Paul. This is plonk. Well, you think you can do better? Go do it. So I did, because we were bringing up our grapes in the Umpqua Valley at the time. It's I make wine at home. I can do this. So I did. So we've got in the car, or there was a label where we put Triangle Tavern on it. We made a Fisherman's Red and a Gilnetter's Delight. And we put Triangle Tavern on the label, which I think he alluded to. I have the original in the car. You can't have a drinking establishment on a wine label. And so BATFE came down hard on him and actually came out and watched us destroy all but a couple of them. And we made the Fisherman's Red, the Gilnetter's Delight. So you actually had to go through water, bleach, isopropanol, water, and then you got into this big Italian press, and you stomped for the Gilnetter's Delight, which was a Zinfandel that probably came up from California. I don't recall where that one came from. But you actually did a foot-stomped Zinfandel dancing to harp music. So you'd be doing a chain, and the harpist would be playing up there, and you'd be stomping the grapes and pressing them with, it was a weird time in the industry. And how do you recapture that? How do you do that? How do we go back to our roots? How do we celebrate our roots? And how do we celebrate how we got here? Alexana is lovely. There was an IPNC tour out there in in 2023. And, that is great. And it's wonderful that the state of the industry has grown there. But in growing there, how do we reach back in time? How do we, what was it, Steve Jobs with his, Think Different campaign about celebrating the weird people? Because the weird people made it what it is today. And, the Think Different, Myron thought differently. Myron didn't believe in population growth, so I'm told by Myron that he gave himself a vasectomy with a Swiss Army knife.
I've heard that too.
He will show you the scars. If you really have to see them. We would have, at the IPNC, or the Amity Harvest Party, it'd be everybody, women, kids, men, family, dogs, pets, whatever. And the MO was that lunch, the women go off for a siesta in the vineyards, and if you're a female 16 or older, you could go with them. But the young kids had to stay with the guys, so the women could just sit down there and listen to music and in the vineyard and just relax. And then as we got closer to the end of the day, Myron would be pulling out bottles of like 83 or 78 or whatever. It's like putting them 10 rows away. It's like, you make it in 10 minutes, you can open that. You know, and we did almost every time. And the best harvest party thing there was 1989, December 17th, in a sleet storm by car headlights, we're picking the estate. And that was a horrible year for wine. You had to leave it hanging. You know, people talk about global warming and stuff. It is an impact and it is fine, but I mean, really, I grew up in this town. I came of age in this town. The daffodils are blooming about a week and a half earlier. You know, it's like Aaron at Red Hawk says, it's not that big. You know, global warming may be on a global scale, a big deal in a lot of things, but in terms of impact on the Oregon wine industry, we were already marginal to begin with, and now we're not quite as marginal, you know. So, yeah, not to be smug about it, but the productions is saying like, well, by 2050, we'll have the climate of Palo Alto. It's like, is that a bad thing? Remember, I'm a fourth generation Oregonian, you know, and not to be smug about other impacts, but, you know, and like Aaron was saying that, you know, we're fine. Pinot will be fine. We don't have to go plow over Syrah. The other thing I miss is that we've planted over to two things. Everything is Pinot, a little bit is Chardonnay, and there's some other stuff out there. We've plowed them under all the Semillon. And Semillon was one of those fast, early ripening whites, made a really good earthy wine. And everybody did it because it was a cash cow. It was a high yield, and it was different. It was unique, and it's gone. You know, it's all been grafted over. And it's like, how do we rediscover some of those things? What made Oregon, Oregon? You know, who will ever make a mango wine? You know, Paul got a grant to use whey because whey, before muscle building, was a waste product of the dairy industry. So he made a cranberry and whey wine and a lemon meringue and whey wine. And these were never my favorite wines. I'm sorry, Paul, I know that you love them and you hope I make them again. And maybe someday you're going to be 100 next year if you lived. I'll make a small batch. But who would have thought a wine with protein in it? You know, or a wine like the lemon meringue pie that you could froth and have a meringue on it. Totally weird.
Or have chocolate suspended in your wine.
Or chocolate, yeah, Dorst chocolate from a Dorst chocolate orange. Not garbage chocolate, because a lot of people do cocoa suspended in Riesling or something, and it's crap. His chocolate orange was literally Dorst chocolate orange, and I think you have the video of him talking about how the chocolate factory was closing and his friend smuggled out cases of it for him. And I was down there last Thursday, and there was still a little bit of it down there. And I'll get that next trip. There's a massive amount of stuff there, like a 250-page master's thesis that he helped write on the economics of small wineries in 1981. Which will be coming to you from your friend.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, maybe I'm a pack rat, maybe I'm mentally weird, but how do you save this for the future? You know, because this is where it came from. There aren't a lot of us, I don't want to say there are very few of us who were that age at that time. I'm not that old, yet I was there really at the very beginning or right after the very beginning. And you know, it's an honor to watch it go. It's an honor to see where it'll become in the next 20, 30, 40 years, you know? But again, how do we move forward, but, you know, not forget our roots? And speaking of roots, I don't remember if this came from Peluso or Thistle, which were Oregon wineries, but this is a French military wine ration can. So apparently French officers were and are issued not fuel cans but wine cans. You know, and again,
Cleaner than water.
yeah, it's cleaner than water. More motivating than water, too. You know, how do we celebrate that international culture? You know, everybody's got a winery says, for $10,000 we'll take you to a few places. You know, what do you see? Tourists, nice tourists. You see, it's like IPNC. You know, how do we go to a French officer's quarters where they're pouring wine out of cans like that? You know, how do we... You guys should knock them off at Linfield in purple and white.
Give them out to our freshmen.
Yeah.
That might not go over very well.
The old joke was we didn't drink beer in college, we drank wine. Which is still true for Linfield students. You know, you go to professors' houses and, you know, understanding jazz. There's always like classes that you fill in the blanks with. And it's like I remember sitting back in like Bill Lincoln's backyard or other people's backyards and listening to jazz and drinking Elk Cove or something or whoever they had ties to. And that was the Linfield experience at the time, you know. And it's an interesting school, great experience. And, you know, again, are we losing that? Are we losing the touch? You know, what do we do with barrels and staves and the Wildcraft cider, which is friends of mine who are just hippies who do wild fermented things down in Eugene, and they are not economics professors, and built a 17,500 square foot cidery and just lost their shirts. But the tables they made out of like salvaged oak, they had probably 1,500 charred barrels, or I saved a couple. And other friends who like made fountains out of whatever. But how do we, you know, who are the Coopers? Who are the people like my friend Paul, PM Industries, who made the barrels? My friend Nancy, who was a fairly famous Nancy Zaffaro food and wine writer. How do we reach these people and get them in front of this camera, but also get their stories? Because, you know, it's great that John Paul invented basically biodynamic and trellising, but who are the people who made the stainless steel in Beaverton, Oregon, which is a former defense contractor, you know? And the industry grew and all these support things grew, but who are they and how do we tell their stories before they're lost?
We're going to bounce back to Linfield for a minute. So tell me about...
Sinfield?
Sinfield, we're going to talk about Sinfield. Tell me about your initial impressions of Linfield and some of your sort of favorite memories from time there.
Well, remember, I was initially impressed by a woman I was dating, so whose dad was the head of the physics department there. So, you know, it's a great small college experience. You knew everybody knew you. There was very little anonymity or animosity there. At the time, it wasn't particularly diverse, but it was Oregon at the time. It's still Oregon today. Oregon is not a very diverse state, you know. So it was a good school. It was a great school. It was a supportive school. You know, he ended up doing a million things there. And it's something where you could edit the yearbook and work on the newspaper and be on the debate team and play on club sports and on and on and on, versus you're going to do this if you're at U of O or OSU or wherever. You know, there was that, oh, why not do this? Oh, hey, we're doing this. Come on over. Oh, you know, we're taking a Pike fire truck over to a winery. Want to come? This has nothing to do with it, but it's a prop. Chippers, which are chipped during the corking process, mislabels or low fills. So you would go ask for chippers, mislabels, or low fills, and they would give you cases of them back in the time. Or they're like $1 a bottle. You know, and this is the time when David Lett was selling South Block for $12 a bottle. You know, Oregon wine hadn't been discovered. And that's another thing I was having a discussion with a bunch of young and upcoming winemakers and a friend named Lori who wants to do wine tours is rather than going to Stoller, wherever, why don't we, you know, go to people who are up and coming but also structure it so not every bottle is $60. Right now everybody's fighting for the upper tier, and we're seeing how many wineries a month closing? Maybe we're fighting too hard for that spot. Who is there in the $20 and $40 price point these days? How do we get there? How do we celebrate them? Who are the up-and-comers with Myron stories or Paul stories or people doing interesting things? Not to diss here or anybody else who's extremely successful, but how do we spread a wider net, tell a wider story? What's going on with the tax per ton? In Oregon, we self-tax producers for grapes with a price per ton. Where is that money going? It used to be going to promote Oregon wine all over the place. I remember I would be going to Boston for business for something, and Myron would give me a couple cases of wine to go take into restaurants when I was there and whatever. Or a best story was Susan was from Salt Lake, and her dad was an OBGYN there, and not Mormons, but we were sophomores or juniors in college. We didn't know any better, and her parents liked wine, so we just bought a case of wine, checked it to Utah, and came trundling down the luggage chute, and her dad's like, "Oh my God, give me your coats, guys." It's like, why? Apparently it's a Class A felony to import wine to Utah. But they loved it. And we went to their country club, Fort Douglas Country Club, for New Year's Eve dinner. And it's like, we went and steamed the tax stamps off Almaden or whatever crap they had at the country club and put them on the Oregon wine, and then they served good wine. But I mean, it just, stories like that. I mean, who would think to, hey, Mark, you're heading to Macworld Boston. Hey, do me a favor, here's a couple cases of wine. Take them to the restaurants when you go to. And I remember during Bridgeport, a friend and I went down to Puerto Vallarta or Cancun or both or whatever. And so Bridgeport Brewery made up some little sample bottles, and there we were taking selfies on film of ourselves drinking Bridgeport in Mexico. and but what happens to the Oregon wine promotional money? Where are we doing it now? How can we spin that money back around to getting us, to helping the young promoters, to salvaging IPNC, to creating more low-key wine events, where you're not having 5,000, 10,000 people and you're getting a 1 ounce pour, then you're waiting an hour for another 1 ounce pour, but you're actually meeting and greeting. So how do we recapture that spirit? And this is my 1983 Leica that I have shot, and the Linfield Wine Archive has probably 10,000 exposures, including the ones in that book, from this Leica.
Still hanging in there after all these years.
It's a Leica.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, a friend who was a Linfield hanger-on somewhere in McMinnville, maybe this from some cow that they turned into hamburger or something, but, it's like, this is the craftsmanship. This is what made us unique. And I mean, there's still people like that out there, but how do we celebrate them? How do we get somebody to make a carrier for Oregon wine out of something like this? Because this lasts.
Let's talk about your life outside of wine, or your life after Linfield. What did you do after you graduated Linfield?
Well, marketing is my undergrad. So immediately after graduation, I met with Norm Meir, who was vice president of advertising for CBNS, Fred Meyer. And I worked for CBNS Advertising forever. And CBNS happened to own the building that Bridgeport was in. So I got insanely tired of IPAs, even though I love Carl Okert. You were dovetailing back to another story. Lake Oswego High School senior graduation party was at Resort at the Mountain. Carl Okert's much younger sister, Maureen, was in my class. Gordon Wilshire was in the class too. The Wilshire family owned Resort at the Mountain. In January, they gave him the day off for the Lake Oswego High School graduation party. So everybody knew 6 months out where our top secret graduation party was going to be. Carl Okert brewed kegs of beer. There was more, and my mother ran the party because she was snitching. So it was like, I was dating Marcy. She was in McMinnville. It couldn't be out of sequence people there. my mom's in charge, bored to tears. It's mom's like, how the hell did they find, where this party was? Because there was pot everywhere. There were film cans full of booze everywhere. There were kegs in the field right next door. It's like, well, Mom, you gave Gordon Wilshire the day off 6 months ago. But a side note there. Anyway, went to work for CBNS. We owned the building. Fred Meyer owned the building that Bridgeport was in. And Carl would come up with like, it's been boiling for 390 days, and its IBUs are 12 billion. And it's like this slightly carbonated glop that will not only survive a trip to India on a British sailing ship, it'll probably survive a round trip to Pluto. And it's like, I got so tired of IPAs. I'm still tired of IPAs. But again, that was another one where the brewery industry branched out. There was, the Ponzi's. Dick and Nancy changed the law to allow for brew pubs. Dick and Nancy founded Bridgeport. And at the time, it was a basement of the old rope factory with benches and pizza. And it was closed loop. The leftover grains, the spelt from the brewing process, went to Save's Island to feed Farmer John's pigs, which came back as chorizo on top of the pizza. Recycling, and if somebody's a vegetarian, I apologize for that visual. It was quite delicious. But again, and again, British cars, opening that up, we tapped the first keg in the back of a Harold Dix Y-Tour MG. There was a pentathlon. A friend of mine, Carol, was 5'2", and it was right after the woman won the Iditarod in Alaska. And, men are men, but women in Alaska win. She beat the crap out of a bunch of guys because Stuart Ramsey, who's still around, there's more brewing in Scotch, but you should interview him just because he has peripheral. And, how far can you throw a 10-pound thing of potatoes or do this or that? And it was called the pentathlon, and she won the Golden Potato Award. and it was fun. How do we recapture that fun? Sipping paint lights and trivia contests are all well and good, but how do we recapture that? What's happening to the brewing industry? It is contracting wildly as well. Part of it's drinking habits, but part of it's loss of esprit de corps. A part of it is, there's a brewery next to my house. And I tried to do what I could to save Anchor Steam, and we saved some of the pitch, the yeast. And so Santee Am and Snow Peak and a couple others are keeping the yeast alive. But, who in their right mind besides Sapporo would buy something like Anchor Steam and then come out with a hazelnut kiwi IPA out of Anchor Steam? It's wrong. It's like, how are you misreading the market? I mean, yeah, there may be a market for that, but don't make it a product there. Create a second label, create whatever. If you're going to be Paul and make weird mango wines, make weird mango wines. Myron never made a mango wine to save his life.
It's actually surprising to me that he didn't.
Oh, Myron was pretty, oh God, Myron hated oak too. Yeah. Hated oak. So, yeah, what else? What other questions do you have for me there?
Well, take us through your career a little bit.
All right. CBNS Advertising, Fred Meyer. When I started, I was the only advertising copywriter. And even though Kroger has bought Fred Meyer, you have some idea how many items there are in a Fred Meyer store. Let's just say that there's nothing I haven't written long form or short form copy on. Or photographed, or, at the time, this is going to sound terrible, but this is the 80s. Fred Meyer had stores in ethnically diverse areas like North Portland. And it's like we advertised in full-page ads in the scanner fried chicken and watermelon. And it was just wrong and insensitive and horrible. So it's like, no, we got to stop this. And to his credit, and to Cy Green's credit, and Orrin Roberts and everybody's credit, it's like, yeah, okay, Mark. We're stopping it. Fix it. So I went out and I interviewed community leaders, and we wrote full pages on community leaders, photographed them, and our sales went up. It became, we're not outsiders, we're helping here. We bought Grand Central stores in Salt Lake in the 80s, and our headline was Pioneer Day Sale. That'd be like having the Portland Flower Festival. It's not entirely wrong, because the pioneers did come in 1847 to Salt Lake, but it's the Pioneers Days Festival, or the Rose Festival. So I got exiled to Marriott's Great American Salt Lake to work to fix that. And I eventually went around everywhere there was or was going to be a Fred Meyer store and spent weeks there, localizing it, finding local products, local history, local people, building huge databases and archives so that people could just draw on them and feel like they were there. From there, I was headhunted away by a bank who foolishly sent me off to banking school, where I got straight C's. My daughter, who's about to graduate from med school, said it's two things, and she's straight A. But you know what they call doctors who get C's? It's like, no, Elise, what do they call them? Doctor. And her other thing was, C's get degrees, Dad.
C's get degrees.
So there is that right and left brain dichotomy that's probably screwed me up for life. But I can read a spreadsheet and do want to make things profitable and understand, why the hell do we fly Citrons over for a champagne house when you're hemorrhaging money for IPNC in 2023? I don't care how ideal you are and how cool it looks. For marketing, for one thing, I help a friend with, marketing is what I do. And anyway, Bill Reed and Lydia own something called Elite Care. And it's like, so how do you market something like that? It's like, well, you can rent a tank from a guy who lives in Wilsonville on Veterans Day. If they're medically able, you can give the old people rides in the tank. But it draws traditional and social media like flies to a corpse flower, and you don't have to spend what little money you have flying a really cool Citron over for a French champagne house. You can find ways to market more cost effectively. And that's what that's what I've done my whole life is, how do you do that? I'm involved with something called AccuShoot now, which is training for military and law enforcement. I'm a centrist left-wing person, a Democrat, who is involved in the firearms industry. I'm also involved in photography. We make film, we make lenses, And also it's like, a friend said, I don't remember the exact term and it's a Yiddish or Jewish term of somebody who brings people together. I would say Yentl, but I don't know if that's the right term. Something, you can look it up or whatever. But wherever I do, whatever I do, it's like I cross-pollinate. I bring people from diverse areas together. And, sometimes I just get out of the way. It's like, yeah, they're doing a port over there. Rich, they want you guys to bring some port over so you can try it and know that they're doing a port over there.
Amazing.
Yeah. And we will open it up and try it because I'm curious. They had a port and cigar night there on Saturday.
Nice.
Yeah. So, how do you get the message across? How do you communicate that? And again, they communicate it to their wine club, but their wine club's this big. How many other people in Oregon do a port? I don't know.
So tell me about, you mentioned, obviously you talked about Shalon and you talked about Amity. Who else have you worked with? What other people have you been with?
Everybody.
Give us some examples.
Okay, remember my dad was the grand poobah of the wine committee for the Rosarians for decades. So, Cal Knudsen's and Dick Arath used to be friends. So Knudsen, Arath, Frank and Chitty at Adelsheim, Adelberry. You name it in my time. Pam from Willful, whose husband committed suicide. I've worked with all of these people. I still work with all these people. And you name it. I've been around them, worked with them, done things with them, made mixtapes for somebody's parties. Speaking of mixtapes, I didn't find them. I was going to find them for you. Susan and I at Linfield used to make, because cassettes are only 45 minutes, open reel tapes because there's in college radio. So we could make open reel tapes and run them at 3 3/4, and they would last a couple hours. So we would make the tape, start the party, go upstairs, don't worry about it, come back, flip it over. I still have some Linfield open reel tapes with the playlists from the 80s that I will get to you for the archives. It has nothing to do with wine, but...
Terrifying concept.
Why? We had a great time. I think we invented being a DJ, but we weren't even there. I mean, you talked about growing up. Growing up, my parents always said that there was money for me to go to a state school. But if I ever wanted, that's like age 8. And my sister got the same lecture. Mine was mow lawns. And there'll be money for a state school, but if you want to have a car, go on a date. And you're talking to somebody who's like that tall. And it's like, oh, they're speaking Martian to me. So I mowed all the lawns. I hate mowing lawns. We bought a nice house in Lake Oswego, and at the time CBNS was, the Pearl was becoming the Pearl. So they were pulling down cobblestones and taking it to the dump. So I had a Grand Wagoneer that I got from the owner of Empire Meat Company. There's this beautiful blood red interior. It looked like the owner of a meat company's silver with this is the 80s Grand Wagoneer monster. And we turned it into a pickup truck for hauling cobblestones. And so we put 1,642 cobblestones in the backyard to get rid of the grass. And now I live in something called State and Castle, which I live on an island with a freaking grass backyard. I think I need to bring in 5 tons of sand to get rid of it. But, so, you have to make money somewhere. And I took a photo class, and Julie Sanders was in the photo class, and I was 15. And did I realize that Dr. John Sanders probably was her dad? 15-year-old dreaming of going to a dark room. Anyway, somebody had an accident with a motorcycle. I took a bunch of photos. It was a tragic accident, but both sides paid a crapload of money for the only photos of the accident. It's like, wait a second. I can pay like $8 or $10 for mowing a lawn, or in the Lake Oswego Review in the Oregon, you're paying like $15 or $20 for every photo published. It's like, wait a second, this is like an hour or 2 to mow a lawn, go where you're gonna go, take pictures, develop them, which you like doing anyway. So anyway, I saved up money and got into photography that way. And it's something that I've always done and done for every winery. And the dovetail there is wherever the wine event, whatever the wine event is, you'll find a camera there attached to me. And you've got tens of thousands, if not more, images there.
Tell me about how the wine has changed. You talked about how the industry has changed. Tell me how the wine has changed.
It's gotten less diverse. The quality overall has improved greatly. It was spotty. That's a good word. Searching for a polite word. There are always, if you've been around it so long, you're always willing to go try something new, because you never know. But you know that Jason Lett or his dad were going to make something good. My aunt and uncle are flying in from New York. They're both deceased now. He was head of the Associated Press, and she was a stringer, a writer for the AP, whatever. And they would bring some friends along. You'd know that, okay, we're going to Erie, we're going here, we're going to Erie, and then we're going to Nick's for dinner, because checkbox, 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 they'll love it. We're not going to Mauritius Red Barn because 2 times ago was good, last time it was plonk, last time it was a little below plonk. They don't exist anymore, it's okay. I think their bottle's in the archive for me. But, you learn what the scope is in marketing. Match the audience with the intended result. I want them to be happy. I want them to go back to New York and say good things about Oregon wine and whatever. And they did. It's interesting that way. So, the quality has come up to be consistent, but it's gotten boring. And it's gotten expensive. My son is just turning 30. His partner of 5 years is from New Zealand. They love Oregon wine. They're very, very successful in the 7 figures between them, but they are very hard pressed to spend $60 or $80 on a bottle of wine. They can afford all of it they want, but the value proposition is lost. It may not be what it costs, or that may be what it costs to make or whatever, but the value proposition in a lot of consumers' minds is lost. And again, going back to marketing and then that weird banking aspect of it, it's got to be affordable. It's got to be something enjoyable. It's got to be approachable.
Tell me about learning to make wine.
Whose book? I can tell you that Myron's book is totally separate than Paul's book, and it's nothing like any wine that I've ever made. Or anybody else's of the dozens and dozens I've been involved with. There's a car full of cookbooks for wine or wine manuals going to the archive from Chalon. But it's like chocolate chip cookies. If I gave everybody a bag of Nestle Toll House cookies in this building and said, we're going to make Toll House cookies, they would come out different because you would add cinnamon because you like cinnamon. You would say, I'm going to make peanut butter chocolate chip cookies, whatever, fill in the blank. I'm vegan, so I'm going to do this. No matter what's written down, it's going to come out different based on, you can say the terroir, the grapes, the number of degree days of heat, the clone that you're using, or really it comes down to the personality of the winemaker and what tools they have at their disposal and what money they have to make the use of those tools. How is the trellising? It's a story, but it is so much a personal thing.
What was it like for you?
Which time and where?
So for the first time you made wine.
Oh, personally? Mm-hmm. Horrible. We made a peach wine. I thought I could make peach wine as good as Paul's. It was fine. It was drinkable. It had to be well chilled, and it was way too sweet. Then we made a bunch of beer, which was fine. Roscoe's Golden Ale and Spencer's Stout, named after 2 dogs. And those were fine because we go to Steinbart's, and I've got a bunch of wine going now. That when the home brewing shop in Corvallis closed a couple of years ago, which is another industry that's dying. And how do we get that back? You think the Homebrew Club for Computers with Steve Jobs, you think they're going away. And who is that next generation coming up besides, the kids of the Ponzis or the Sokol Blossers or whatever? Where are we getting that young blood? And there's a lot of it out there, but where are they learning and where are they experimenting? It's the same with film. Harrison founded Candido, and I work with Harrison on sourcing film because it's like vinyl records. This is a roll of Ilford film. In 2005, this is a current roll, you could have bought this at any store for $5.72 in 2005. This is 2028 vintage. It's $25. No one's put a nickel into a film factory since then. There's just greed involved. So our motto is pay for flights, not film. But how do you provide an on-ramp for people who want to experience home brewing and try it? Where do they go to get a cardboard or a kit for $99 that lets you go make your own wine or beer? You can still go to Steinbart's, but all these little ones are gone. There's one in Eugene, and there's Steinbart's, and I don't think there's anybody else. What does that do? What happened to the homebrew brewing clubs? Because I know that Matt and Crystal, who opened the brewery next door to me, because as a city councilor, I changed a couple laws. So, and again, sadly, they brew nothing but IPAs. But anyway, there was an empty garage. It's like, how do we change the zoning to make them do something? And they have sip and paint parties, and they have trivia nights and things, and they're relatively successful. But where is the on-ramp? Because they started in Corvallis at a homebrew store. And, how do we get that on-ramp? And Linfield provides the wine studies program, so does Chemeketa, so does Umpqua, so does South Sound. But where is that outside influence too? You're training vineyard managers and tasting room managers. Where are the winemakers coming from? Where's the inspiration coming from? we tried to get Clatsop to buy Chelan and turn it into an on-ramp for Clatsop Community College, but that never happened.
With your own personal winemaking, you talked about sort of learning wine. I'm curious about what's the favorite thing you've made? What's the best bottle of wine you've made?
Oh, probably some leftover Pinot that, 20% of the Oregon wine crop or more last year wasn't harvested. So I mean, for instance, hey Mark, come on over. I have yet to make my favorite wine because, and it's ridiculous. I mean, why isn't that gleaned? Why isn't some college program taking that and turning that into product? There's a lot of, it's like, well, it wasn't worth me paying to have harvested and me dealing with. Why don't we direct students to grab it?
And sell it.
And sell it. I mean, yeah, or just play with it, or learn from it, or learn the experience, the hands-on. It's like a harvest party. I don't know anybody who does friends and family harvest parties like we did at Amity. And hey, it was cheap labor, free labor, aside from having a dinner catered. It was fun. And then also that time of year when you're like in harvest, is a poor cash flow time for wineries. So what you do is you extend the employee discount of 50% off to the library. And of course, all your workers go spend crap loads of money buying your old stock. And, what happened to, where's that model? Get the Morris dancers like we did at Amity out there, and get companies like Ochin out there with, and.
You talked about you've kind of worked with a lot of people, worked with everybody in the industry off and on. I'm curious, who have you not talked about that you want to talk about? What stories do you want to share?
Oh, I mean, Rob Bell, who you just interviewed, is huge. There have been times up there when I've gone up there with a friend, and like Nancy and I were, and other friends and I were up there to say hi, and you end up in that barrel room blending until 2 o'clock in the morning. Listening to him spin stories. In 1997 at Riverview Bancorp, we underwrote his loan. And a covenant of the loan was we couldn't tell anybody that Michael Sebastiani from California was his winemaker, because California is an evil thing back then. And so it's like, so you got to know him well, and you got to watch his success over the years. But he is a gregarious, outgoing person. But the people that I'm attracted to, the people in the industry, tend to be that larger-than-life, interesting person. And there's so many of them, it's just, and again, how do you get them together in a room? And, Rob is talking to Aaron, who's talking to so-and-so about how do we create a better than IPNC while building from that roots. One of the side tours and career was I used to put on IndyCar races, NASCAR races, air shows, and jazz festivals. And so I'm used to putting together events for 100,000 plus. And I also know that a lot of the events I've been involved with, COVID killed them. You can say you're going to pick up after COVID, but we're about to lose the Portland Rose Festival. The Rose Festival is $1.2 million in debt and isn't sure that it's going to be a going concern. How do we save that? I remember in high school going downtown, and Bud Clark he dated a woman that my mom went to Lincoln with, and he would give us overalls and Rod Ernbiller paint, and we would paint over graffiti downtown in the 80s. And, there was this he's the person, and he and the guy who owns Music Millennium, they made Portland weird. How do we make Portland something it is now? You go downtown Portland, I don't know if you've been, but even though the street camping ban is there, no one goes downtown Portland. It's dead. There was a piece in the Portland Business Journal and the Oregon Economic on a doom spiral, and are we in a Detroit-like doom spiral? How do we save that? The Portland Trailblazers by law have to be sold. Chances are they'll be snapped up by Seattle. What happens to Portland if we lose the Rose Festival and the Blazers? How do we fix that on a global scale, a macro scale, a small city in the west on a left coast scale? How do we fix events like IPNC? It's time to roll up our sleeves and say, yeah, it was nice, but, it built something. It had a reputation. If it's just a paused year, we got to do something. we've got to create some sort of event with an IPNC name tag in 2025, even if it's just a placeholder, so that it doesn't die. And if it's gone 2 years, it's gone forever. Which, there used to be a waiting list to get there.
Yeah. A lottery.
Yeah.
Lottery for tickets.
Yeah. And it lost its soul. It lost its young audience, which is what happens. But how do you put youth and vitality and interest back into it?
So speaking of IPNC, you mentioned being there in the very early on days.
Oh yeah, I think we're the first one.
Tell me about how it did grow and sort of the memories you have of people who were there or events that happened there.
Well, again, it started in the oak grove, in the circle, with tents in a downpour, and it was just a very approachable thing, and it was a very affordable thing. And then it got less approachable and less affordable and frankly less interesting. There were some Psalms who wanted to get tattoos of pork or the chefs who wanted to get tattoos of pork or cow carcasses, cuts of meat on their torsos. So being the local there, it's like I called up I don't have any tattoos, I'm the only person in the world who doesn't. But I called up some tattoo shops and they took a couple Linfield vans up and got tattoos one time. The Psalms would just get smashed and have fun. And I think a lot of that was tamped down. And the demographic and psychographic aged, both in income and, and there's no sense of whimsy, there's no sense of, this is going to be a fun weekend. It's let's go on an old person bus, we'll go have a nice plated dinner or lunch, then we'll go back to campus, we'll sleep for a couple hours, then we'll have something over here, and then we'll go to another one tomorrow, then we'll have the salmon bake, and then we'll do the walkabout and fly out of town. And, I'm sorry if I offend somebody, but there's no one to offend, you're dead event. We got to fix it because too much time, blood, sweat, and tears were made doing it. But, how do we, Women for Wine Sense used to have events all over the Pearl, and they were just a kick.
Nancy Ponzi?
Well, Nancy was a couple others too.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Oregon Wine, there were a billion events. You've got glasses from 100 of them in the car right now or in the museum. It's not just the evergreen wine one or the seafood and wine one or whatever, but there were micro events all over the place. There were some glasses I found down at Chalon from a 1982 Honeywood event in Salem. So I took them to Honeywood, and they're like, oh my God, that was the year I was born. So this is the daughter of the founder, whatever. And what do we do to celebrate that heritage? What do you do to create more approachable micro events? What do we do to create, there's no reason at all you can't, how do we I shot a bunch of photos, which I think I sent you, of a 1934 biplane flying over the Hood River or whatever that Apillion is, but literally flying over Cathedral Ridge from a Spart and the Columbia Gorge, And I talked to Stephanie, who runs the museum. It's like, oh, sure, we'd love to have an event where, people came and they bought the plane ride and we could serve them wine on the tri-motor. And yeah, let's do it. Okay. Well, I'll get together with Rob and Rob will be, oh, hell yeah, let's do it. But how do we take McMinnville and do that? When I went to college, Evergreen Airlines was there. We had the only 747 capable airport besides Portland International. You'd be there and CIA's own airline would be screaming in. Evergreen was famous for working with government agencies. It's like, oh, who did they take over the Pacific? And Del Smith had this insane weapons collection. But stories, events, how do we capture them? How do we create them? How do we create the experience? The Linfield experience, but the Oregon wine experience, It's more than old people on buses going from plate, nap, dinner, plate, nap, salmon and bake, plate, nap, walk about and fly out, you know. The other good thing about that was everybody was flying out. For years, the IPNC glasses had the year on them. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody I know has a collection of Riedel glassware that's like immense. I put on events for 100,000 people. Most of them were profitable. All of them were profitable. Some of them were marginally profitable, but profitable at the end of the day. I serve in a lot of boards. How can you have a world-class caliber event and not have your eyes on the prize? You know, I was president of a gun club. Again, I'm a liberal. And our treasurer absconded with $120,000, which hurt the heck out of us, but we're not going to die. We're going to fix it, you know? And it still exists. I'm not involved with that one anymore, but, you know, the asset is the name. Is there anything left in the wine library? We could go to Myron tomorrow, when he's back in April, and say, hey, Myron, and he's done it for me before, could I get a couple 25-year Pinot, estate Pinot verticals out of your 2,000, 3,000 bottles in your basement? And, you know, we could do it with Dick and Nancy probably as well, and probably with Sokol Blossers, and use that as something to rekindle an event, even if it's just the only event.
What was your favorite event that you put on outside of wine?
Favorite event?
Or what was a smashing success?
Oh, I mean, you try to make everything. I mean, the air shows were a kick because I've always liked aviation and planes.
Was that here?
You know, I mean, they're all over Abbotsford and whatever, but yeah, Hillsborough Airport. And it's like, oh, I've never flown on a Ford Tri-Motor. Oh, I've never flown on a, you know, the only thing I've never flown on is a DC-3 because I had the choice of either the only flying Boeing 247 or DC-3. So I flew on a 247. We took it down to the Bay Area and flew back.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we used to fly with, the guy who shot Earthrise, Bill Anderson, the Apollo 8, was flying a P-51 and an F-16 for the Heritage flight. And it was a trainer, two-seat wimpy there, you know, but yeah, you got, you know, the snowbirds would come in from Canada, and the first thing that landed was a C-130 bar plane. Not a support craft or anything else. The first thing that lands is a Canadian bar. And, you know, that was a wild event. On another note, we used to do Luis Palau because Mike, the owner, was religious and liked Luis Palau. And Luis Palau put on his Festival 99 and other things. And we took over all of Waterfront Park. And, you know, I'm Episcopalian nominally, but my job is marketing, and it's not a bad thing and whatever. And like we literally ran all the stores out of bottled water. We ran the Gideons out of Bibles. We are trucking in. We had every Jumbotron on the West Coast. It was the most densely packed thing. And it's like, okay, go. And jars of clay played, and they were great. And then the Dandy Warhols were playing across the street at some pub. So it's running, all good. We're over watching the Dandy Warhols.
Best of both worlds.
Yeah, but it's, you know, you get an event, you get it self-sustaining, you make something happen. In IPNC, you and I could make something happen with somebody's blessing or not. You know, I could go get Fest Hall in Mount Angel or whatever. You know, but Linfield should own that name. And something needs to happen. And it needs to happen with a lot of journalists or wine writers or saying, we're alive. You know, we will not go quietly in the night. You know, a lot of people have spent a lot of time doing this. Let's keep it going.
You have seen a lot of the growth of the Oregon wine industry. You mentioned you've been in it for most of its growth. What does the industry look like now, and where does it go from here?
Too many people are chasing too few with the same product. There's very little differentiation. We've recreated Napa Valley, which we can and should do, but in doing so, we've lost our soul.
What happens next?
We've got to find our soul. How do we fertilize them? How do we get people going to them? How do we support them? How do we make people aware of them? how do we grow something besides Pinot and Chardonnay? You know, why is Umpqua Valley verboten? Why can't we go up the gorge? You know, and then you're talking about the Oregon wine industry. At the very beginning, there was Nehalem Bay. It was run by hippies. It's still there. They now make their wine at Honeywood. That was the #1 most visited winery, and their wine was not that good. It wasn't being made at Honeywood. It was made by a bunch of hippies down there. And that was the reputation of the Oregon wine industry in the 80s. And we've made huge strides from there. But we wanted to be Napa Valley. We became Napa North, and we lost our soul.
What's next for you?
Lunch. A glass of the port.
In a more metaphorical sense, then.
Oh, it's still in, well, I mean, right now what's next on me for in the wine end world is how do we solve IPNC and save that problem? But B, because I am a historian, or I funnel history, how do I get all of Paul's correspondence so that you can look, but the future can look at what did it take to get started as a winery in Oregon in 1980, at essentially the very beginning, you know? And right now we have a chance to capture 45 years of everything because Paul kept everything. And the archives will distill it, future people will look at it, but by doing that, we've solved that question. You know, everybody knows Leica because they wrote down everything that they ever did. On the Beatles, they never threw away a second of tape, you know, which gives us a view as to a creative process or something. And lets you answer that question. What made things successful? What didn't make things successful? At IPNC, I don't think they have any records.
Some, not a lot.
When's the last time there was a Memorial Day barrel tasting?
I don't know.
80s, 90s maybe? Campus commencement is done. Dillon's open. Linfield owns lots of tents. It's typically, when I graduated Linfield, it was 103 degrees. And Mr. Rogers was our commencement speaker.
They're from Mr. Rogers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we all wore sweaters. It was 103 degrees.
1982?
3.
83.
Technically, I graduated in 84, but my class was 83. So I was 1/10 of a credit off because I didn't take enough understanding jazz, and they decided that ski team didn't count. The winter interim, or winter, what do you call it now? Winter break. Jan term was a 5-week period. And so they had ski team where they would take us up on Bob. We were supposed to get credit for it, but apparently it didn't work out that way. So, yeah. Well, I mean, what do you do in winter interim? You're in McMinnville. It's dreary. They'll bus you up to Mount Hood. And you can ski against the other kids.
Amazing.
So, but save the event. Let's reach back in time, see what worked. Some things didn't work, they can be discarded. Some things, you know, I have in the car every single article that was ever written about Paul. Do you know what mechanicals are for, like, film to make labels of? For CMYK on printing plates? I have all that shit. You know, how much did it cost? And that's one of the receipts to make a gold stamp label in 1982. And why would you, you know, and I was talking to that we need to bring beauty back to our labels. You know, where did we lose that? Particularly on a $60 bottle of wine, even today, a $1 or $2 label.
All the questions I have for you. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about? Anything we didn't cover?
Oh, I'm sure there is. I mean, first of all, and it's going to sound like a shout out because it is, but a huge shout out to Linfield for creating the wine archive, because so much history is lost. And it is an honor to have donated tons of crap already and donate more because, you know, I mean, it used to be you were decked out for these things. You were a team. And again, it's that coming together and being part of a community. Some wineries will sell you a t-shirt or something for $90. But I mean,
this is swanky.
We all had little clipboards like that. And I had called everybody and later emailed everybody and got all the families down. And, you know, who's coming to the thing, what are you bringing for the potluck, how many kids, how many dogs, are the dogs friendly? You know, you get there, some volunteers will be down the gate checking you in and giving you your kid shirts and your adult shirts and coats and stuff.
All right. That's all I have for you.
Thank you
so much, Mark. We appreciate it. Appreciate you spending the time. Appreciate all the materials you've donated and the future ones to come.
Oh, there's oceans more.
I can't wait. Thank you so much. We'll let you off the hook.